Two-Man Job by Savage Messiah. The landlord had a sick sense of humor when he called it a two-man job. More like 24, with the amount of men passing out from the smell of that unit. It was your typical fourplex in a quiet, suburban neighborhood. The houses here were old, their paint peeling, lawns overgrown, a far cry from the tidy suburban image that once was. The house in question was no exception. Its lawn was a jungle of weeds and discarded items, a rusting swing set tilting dangerously to one side. The house itself looked as if it had been abandoned for years, its windows grimy and its wooden steps creaking under our weight. "This is the place," Jake said, checking the address on his clipboard. "Looks like no one's lived here for a decade," I replied, feeling a sense of dread creeping over me. We grabbed our gear from the truck and approached the front door. As I reached for the doorknob, the stench hit me, a foul mix of decay and filth. It was so strong that it made my eyes water and my stomach turn. I hesitated, looking at Jake, who was already pulling his gloves tighter, a grim determination on his face. "Ready?" I asked, trying to mask my unease. "Let's do it," he replied, his voice steady. The door creaked open, revealing the chaos inside. The narrow pathways through the piles of trash seemed to close in on us as we stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the overpowering smell of rot. Every surface was covered with grime and clutter. Old newspapers were stacked precariously, teetering as we moved past them. Empty food containers littered the floor, their contents long since rotted away, leaving only a foul residue behind. Broken furniture lay scattered, some pieces barely recognizable under the layers of filth. "How could anyone live like this?" Jake muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. We navigated our way through the mess, each step crunching beneath our boots. The floor felt unstable, as if it might give way at any moment under the weight of the horde. The deeper we went into the house, the worse the smell became. It was suffocating, making it difficult to breathe. As we reached the living room, we found more piles of trash, the furniture completely buried under mountains of discarded items. The walls were stained with dirt and mold, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. "Unbelievable," Jake said, looking around. "I can't even imagine what the bedroom looks like." We pushed on, making our way to the back of the house. The hallway was narrow, with barely enough room for us to squeeze through. The doors on either side were blocked by more piles of junk, but we could see glimpses of what lay beyond. One room was filled with old electronics, their cords tangled together in a chaotic mess. Another was packed with clothing, some of it spilling out into the hallway. Finally, we reached the bedroom. The smell here was almost unbearable, a mix of sweat, decay, and something else I couldn't quite identify. The bed was a mountain of filthy clothing, the sheets stained and torn. It was hard to tell where the mattress ended and the clothes began. The room was dimly lit, the only source of light coming from a small, grimy window. In the corner, the television set stood out, oddly clean compared to the rest of the room. It sat on a rickety stand, the old VHS VCR underneath it. "Hey, check this out," Jake said, pointing to the TV. "Wonder what's on these tapes." "Let's focus on the job," I replied, trying to stay on task. "We need to clear this place out." But Jake's curiosity got the better of him. He found a tape already in the VCR and pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing static before cutting to a grainy, dimly lit image of the very bedroom we stood in. "What the hell?" Jake whispered, his eyes glued to the screen. I sighed and headed back to the truck to get more garbage bags. "Don't waste time with that crap," I called over my shoulder. "We have a lot to do." When I returned, the house was eerily silent. The only sound was the static on the TV. "Jake?" I called out, but there was no response. I walked into the bedroom and Jake was gone. The only sign of him was the static on the TV. Anger and a touch of fear rose in me. Had he seriously bailed on me? I couldn't believe it. "Damn it, Jake," I muttered, feeling the weight of the job pressing down on me. I continued to clean most of the unit by myself, leaving the larger furniture, especially the huge bed in the bedroom, for tomorrow when another coworker could help. As I finally wrapped up for the day and headed home, something nagged at me. In the truck, I noticed a bag of tapes Jake must have left behind. Curiosity gnawed at me, and despite my exhaustion, I decided to take a look at them when I got home. That night, after dinner, I popped one of the tapes into my own VHS player. The screen showed a camera shot of the bedroom, I leaned in, my heart starting to race. There in the frame was Jake. The camera must have been taping while I was gone. He seemed to be investigating something under the bed. Suddenly, grotesque, pus-covered arms reached out from beneath the bed and grabbed him. I watched in horror as they pulled him under, his screams cut short. The arms were sickly and rotting, with patches of skin peeling off, revealing raw, oozing flesh underneath. The bed shook violently as Jake's muffled screams echoed through the room. I could see his fingers clawing desperately at the floorboards before they too disappeared into the darkness under the bed. A naked, crazed man, the hoarder tenant, crawled out from under the bed, his eyes wild and unblinking. His body was covered in festering sores, and his movements were unsettling, almost insect-like. He wore Jake's uniform, pulling it over his own filthy, scarred skin. Then, with a chilling smile, he reached for the camera and pressed stop. My blood ran cold. I could barely breathe as I heard my wife calling out to me from the other room. "Honey, someone from your company is at the door. I'm letting him in." "No," I screamed, but my voice was hoarse and weak. I stumbled out of the living room, my mind racing. But I was too late.